Hello and welcome. In today's session, we are going to look at production planning and manufacturing. We will take a look at the organization structure first, then look at some key processes and see how these production planning org units and the key processes fit in with a bigger picture. And then we will look at the system, real life IDIS system, and create a few of these entities. So this is what the org structure looks like. At the top you have the client. The client is a unit within an SAP ERP system that is self-contained both in legal and organizational terms and in terms of data, with separate master records and an independent set of tables. From a business viewpoint, the client represents a corporate group, for example. Under the client, you have controlling area and companies. A company is what you would typically understand from a company. It's essentially the smallest legal unit for which accounts are created. And the controlling area is essentially used to club one or more companies. Below the company code, you have valuation areas. Now, valuation area can have a 1:1 correspondence with a company, or under one company code, you can have multiple valuation areas. Below this is the plant, probably the most important organization unit from a production planning perspective. What is not shown here in the slides is that a plant can be subdivided into a storage location. The storage location is an org unit that facilitates the differentiation of stocks of materials within a plant. Inventory management on a quantity basis is carried out in the plant at storage location level. The physical inventory is also carried out at this level. These org units are tightly linked to each other to quickly process the relevant data for a business area, for example. So if you had a cost relevant transaction that occurs in plant 1000, the relevant records in controlling area 1000 are automatically updated. The valuation area is the org level at which material quantities and values are managed. For example, if you are implementing product costing, then a valuation area must exist for each plant. Within each valuation level, you can differentiate between values and quantities for valuation. For example, in-house production has different value than external procurement for the same material. And this is done by using different valuation types within a valuation area. Selection of valuation area level automatically causes the creation of a valuation area for each plant. To use product costing and order costing, inventory must be evaluated at plant level and not at a company code level, for example. From a production planning perspective, these are some of the key master data elements that you need to define and work with when working on production planning. So for example, you have the material. Material essentially contains information on products that a company constructs, procures, manufactures, stores, and sells. The information is stored in a database that is a central source of data on materials. Materials are also used for other areas like sales and distribution and procurement. Material master record integrates data from different areas of the company. So when we look in the system, we will see the different components that make up a material master. A bill of material, BOM, is a complete, formally structured list of components that make up a product or assembly. So for example, if you have a tool, that tool may be made up of 5 different components. Each of these components is managed as a separate material with its own inventory, manufacturing processes, etc. The work center is a location that defines when and where production resources are required according to order requirements. In different companies and different settings, work centers are also called machine, labor, or capacity centers. PRTs are production resource tools. These are not directly consumed like tools, but help in assisting with the tool working. So for example, you may have production inspection tools that are needed for testing pumps, and you will need to create these in the system to use them. Documents are things like a technical drawing, a paper document, a photograph, etc., and these can be linked to materials or to BOMs or to routings. Text processing is used for creating and managing text data. So if you want to add a text to a material, giving a description, how to use the material, etc., that is covered by text processing. Classification essentially helps you to in case you want to add new fields. So for example, during the evaluation of your project may realize that it needs custom fields to provide the organization with more information on master data or transaction data. Without having to modify the delivered SAP tables, you can use the classification system to add fields to the material master for information purposes, or to provide more information about existing inventory, for example. This is very frequently used when you are working with the so-called variant configuration and uses characteristics, classes, and objects. For example, we'll have a quick look at this when we go into the IDIS system. Before we go further, let's take a look at the system and look at a few of these components that we've talked about. So we're going to use the ERP IDIS system for this. I double click here and I get a screen like this. I'm user 35. Enter my password, and this is the standard SAP menu which the end users use. What we are interested in is logistics and production, and this is where we can see all the master data. So I open this, so I have material master, bills of material, work center, routing, etc., and there's a lot more. In a typical project, you would for the majority of the time be working with these 3 or 4 standard things and not really go down to engineering change management, for example. A typical project. That's not to say that you will not need to know this at all, but the main focus is on things like material, bills of material, work center, routings. So if I open my material master and I want to display an already existing material, I can display it as it stands today, or I can display it at a key date. What this basically means is that I can plan for changing the material in the future, and that's what this enables me to see, a future dated planned change. So we'll simply display it for the current period, and I have a material here which is TF111, and when I click enter, I am asked by the system which view of the material I would like to see. Now, as we discussed, the material is a central logistics entity, and it is used by not just production planning but by sales, for example, by warehouse management, quality, accounting, costing, and pretty much the whole entity of SAP modules use the material. So for us, we'll be more interested in MRP and the basic data. So let's take a quick look. The system says I want to see this basic data for which plant, because a material can exist for different plants, and for each plant it can have a different MRP profile, a different base unit of measure, and so on and so forth. So I click enter, and this is what a material master in SAP looks like. You have various tabs that give you various pieces of information, and if you drop down here, let me see if I just move this a little bit, and now you can see if I click on this button, you can see the different tabs that are represented here. So if I want to see my sales related data, I click this and the system says for which sales organization, because if you remember when we started this transaction we did not enter a sales org, so I need to give a sales org, because similarly to plants the data for a specific sales organization may be different for different sales orgs, so I need to give a distribution channel as well. So let me try distribution channel 10, and now I see my sales related data here. This was the classification that we spoke about. So if I click classification, I see that this material belongs to this class, and this class has certain characteristics which are all inherited by this material. Now you do not work with the classification system in terms of creating new classes or characteristics in the material master, but you need to go to a different transaction for that, and we'll have a quick look. So this is my original menu, and if I do not recall what transaction it was or where it was, all I need to do is to go to this search box, find, and I use classification, and the system takes me directly to the classification system. Now this is where I can set up a new class, assign and create characteristics and so on, but we won't go into this in too much detail. This was just a kind of information for you. So this is back to my material master. So hopefully this gives you a good idea about how to work with materials, how to use them. There is also configuration, which we will look at in a bit. We'll see how the material master and the different organization units are actually configured. So now let's go to customizing and see how different org units are created. So the transaction is SPRO, and this is where I do my customizing. I go to the reference IMG, and this is where all the customizing for an SAP project is typically done. So for creating the enterprise structure, this is the node I'm interested in, and first I do my definitions and then I do my assignments. So under definitions, these are the different areas: financial accounting, where I define my company; controlling, logistics, so on and so forth. So let's take a quick look at logistics. This is where I can define my valuation level, which can be either at plant or company code. So currently my valuation level is set at the plant level, and this is where I define my plant. So let me create a new plant. Double click, and typically when I have to create a new plant, I do not start from scratch, but I select an appropriate one and simply copy it. So I change the name to T35, give a description, test plant, and then I can change other details like address, etc. And I get a prompt wherein I can change different details, but I will not change any detail for now, and that's it. I get a message that my plant has been created, which is T35 here, and I can take a look at the details. So it's as simple as that to create a plant. Let me save this data, and when I save a data, I get a customizing request, because remember we are in customizing, and most of the changes we make here would need to be transported to a test or a production system, and the transport happens via this request. I'll simply use a request that was existing, or I could have created a new request on my own. Similarly, I define a location. A location is always linked to a plant. It's unique to a plant, which basically means that I can use the same location ID for different plants, as you can see has been done here. And then I can go to assignment and actually assign my plant to a company code. So that is done in Logistics General, assign plant to a company code. And so you can see that different plants are assigned to different company codes. So what I will do is my newly created plant, I will assign it to company code 1000. So again, I just copied an existing entry and changed the plant from an existing plant to T35. Press enter and my assignment is complete. Again, the change request, and my changes have been saved. So I get a message here saying data was saved and written to the database. So now we've had a look at the org structure, master data elements in production planning. We've seen how to work with master data, how to configure the org structure, and now we will take a look at some process. So these are some of the key processes around production planning and manufacturing. You start typically with sales and operations planning, which generates a forecast for, say, the year, the demand for the year. You can use the SAP APO, which is the Advanced Planner and Optimizer for this, and typically forecasting techniques are used to generate a demand forecast. So this is what does that. And then you come to demand management, which is the management of planned independent requirements. The behavior of independent requirements in material requirement planning, or MRP, is determined by their requirement type or the planning strategy. So these strategy or the requirement type need to be defined in customizing and assigned to the material master, and that determines how these planned independent requirements are dealt with. Planned independent requirements are stock requirements that can be derived from a forecast of future demand. In make-to-stock production scenario, you want to start procurement or manufacture of the affected materials without waiting for specific sales orders. On the other hand, this kind of procedure allows you to reduce delivery times. However, you can use forecast planning to spread the burden as evenly as possible across your production resources. Sales orders, which are equivalent to customer independent requirements, are created in sales and distribution. Customer requirements can enter material requirement planning directly depending on the requirement type, and this is always desirable if you want to plan for specific customers. Master Production Scheduling, or MPS, enables you to plan materials that are very important for the company, critical resources. It is normally the case for these materials that the master production schedule is first defined at the level of this critical or important material before the dependent assemblies and purchase parts are planned and procured. The rest of the materials are planned using MRP, and we'll take a close look at this. MRP, Material Requirement Planning. This takes the current and future sales as its reference point. The planned requirement quantities trigger the MRP calculation. In MRP, the requirement elements include sales orders, planned independent requirements, material reservations, the dependent requirements created by exploding the bomb, etc. If the MRP run determines that quantities are short and they need to be either procured or manufactured in-house, then it can raise an appropriate purchase requisition if you want to procure it externally, or create a planned order if you want to manufacture it in-house. Now there's another way by which a planned order may be converted either to a production order, or this can go back to creating a purchase requisition. This brings us to the concept of the MRP area. Without MRP areas, all material requirement planning takes place at the plant level. This means that all the requirements of a material for all storage locations that are not planned separately or excluded from MRP flow into requirements planning together at the plant level. The settings defined in the material master are valid for the entire plant. With the introduction of MRP area, a large degree of differentiation is possible in MRP, and planning takes place separately for each MRP area. It is possible to plan the requirements separately for different production lines. For example, in storage location MRP areas, one or more storage locations are grouped together under one MRP area. This unit is planned separately from the remaining plant and MRP areas, and you can assign a receipt for procurement or issue element a requirement to a storage location area using the storage location. A storage location can be assigned to only one MRP area. So there is a 1:n relationship. One MRP area can have multiple storage locations. However, one storage location can only go to one MRP area and not to another one, for example. So let us now go into the system and look at how we work with these concepts that we've discussed. So let us now go back to our material master and take a look at some of the fields that we spoke about, and then look at how we customize those. So a transaction for going to material master in the display mode is MM03, and this was the material we had a look at earlier. We select views. Let's look at basic data and the MRP views here. The plant was 1000 and the storage location for this plant is number 2. So I go to MRP1. There are 4 different screens for MRP. So some of the things you have here is the base unit of measure, the MRP type. So if you look at different MRP types can be defined, and this is where you can also define the MPS, and that would mean that you want to plan the material separately. It's an important material if you choose MPS. And here are the MRP areas. For this plant there is no MRP area defined yet, so you can't select anything, but if it was, you could select from one or multiple MRP areas. The second one, procurement type, E indicates its in-house production. So this material is not procured from outside but manufactured in-house. Strategy group number 40, this is what determines how you deal with requirements that may come either from customer demand or are planned independent requirements. And if you scroll down, you can do your configurable material settings, typically used in variant configuration. MRP4 screen, settings around bomb explosion, and storage location MRP settings. So these are some of the settings we saw in the slides. This is where they exist in the material master. Now let's take a quick look at where and how to configure these settings. So for that we go to SPRO, our configuration transaction. /n is basically saying that I want to exit from this screen and go to the configuration screen driven by this transaction. So this is my configuration. So I go to production, material requirement planning, master data, and this is where I've got my MRP area. So if I look at what's already been defined, what I see is there are quite a few. So let's look at the hamburger plant MRP area. So this is what it is. You can assign storage locations to your MRP area and the plant itself. And then you go to independent requirement parameters, and here's where you have the strategy, essentially a combination of how you deal with plan independent requirements and customer requirements. So let's take a look at this strategy. So requirement types for independent requirements and customer requirements. The combination of these two give you the strategy which we saw in the material master a while back. So there are quite a few settings for production planning and manufacturing, both in customizing and for the end user. We hope you enjoyed this quick overview, and see you again soon.